Throughout the years, there have been stories of a giant bipedal ape-like creature who lives in the Himalayas. Footprints have been found in the snow, and many respectable adventurers, hikers, and mountaineers have claimed to have seen this creature. Those who live in the region have various names for it as well. The Himalayans have called it the Zuta, the Bunmaki, the Merka, and the Kang Admi, to name a few, and the few I can almost pronounce. Much easier to pronounce and recognize is one other name, the Yeti. And in 1921, it was given an even more sensational name, the Abominable Snowman. Now, many attempts have been made to prove its existence. But could such a creature exist? Well, in a sense, we know that it has. Fossilized remains of a large primate known as Gigantopithecus have been found in the region. And it is thought that Gigantopithecus went extinct around 300,000 years ago. And it would have made quite the impression were you to have seen it. Estimates put it at 10 feet tall and weighing half a ton. Such a creature would surely be abominable. Now, who knew that this elusive creature would, in 1958, have a strange encounter of its own with famed actor and star of It's a Wonderful Life, Jimmy Stewart. If this were a movie, it would start out with Indiana Jones seated in a dark and smoky bar somewhere in Nepal. In this case, it's not Indiana Jones, but it is Irish-American explorer Peter Byrne. And he has just overheard two Sherpas mention the Mate. Now, Byrne is there specifically for this very reason. His expedition to the Himalayas has been funded by another man, Tom Slick. Slick earned his wealth in oil and was obsessed with strange stories of wild men, yetis, and even the Loch Ness Monster. He funneled some of his considerable wealth into expeditions to find these creatures, or to at least prove that they existed. And it just might be paying off. The leader of the latest expedition, Peter Byrne, was talking to these two Sherpas who knew of such a creature. In fact, what they knew was as good as gold. One of the things which has troubled researchers and explorers over the years is the lack of a body, some physical evidence that the Yeti walked the earth. And here, Peter Byrne has just learned that such evidence existed. Apparently, many years before, a Tibetan monk spotted a Yeti near a cave where he often went to meditate. Years later, on another trip to meditate in the same cave, he discovered that the Yeti had died and its corpse was there. When the monk left, he took with him two things, a hand and the Yeti's scalp. Pleasant. Byrne asked the obvious burning question, where was the hand and scalp now? The Sherpas told him that they were on display at the monks' monastery in Pangboche. Now, Byrne knew of the Pangboche Monastery, and it wasn't easy to get to. It was set high in the mountains with a constant threat of snowstorms and avalanches made for a less than enjoyable journey. But Byrne lived for these things. Not one to shy away from a treacherous journey, he began the long hike that would take days to get to the monastery. When he arrived, he was greeted by the monks who lived there and brought through dim, candlelit halls to be shown the remains. And there they were, both the hand and the skull cap, exactly as he'd been told days before by the two Sherpas. The hand itself was a sight to behold. It had long, blackened fingers that were crusty with flaking skin. The skull cap was also impressive, with tufts of dark reddish hair still attached to it. Byrne had to have them. But, the monks explained, the remains were a prized possession and could not be allowed to leave the monastery. You see, they explained, the Yeti's hand and skull fragment had magical powers. It protected them from bad luck. So, Byrne had a dilemma to ponder over. What to do now? He'd found what he'd come looking for. He'd found evidence of the Yeti's existence. It wasn't an entire body, but it was the next best thing. The hand could be examined by science. It could prove that such creatures still roamed the Himalayas, or at least had recently, assuming these body fragments didn't represent the last of its kind. Byrne decided he'd have to meet with Tom Slick. Perhaps the wealthy American would have some ideas. Maybe a considerable donation to the monastery would help the monks decide to part with either the hand or the skull cap, or maybe both. So it was off to London, where Byrne met with Slick and another man, the famed primatologist William Osman Hill. Hill had a surprise up his sleeve, or to be more exact, in a brown paper bag beneath the table. During the conversation, Osman told Byrne that all he needed was a finger. Just one, to determine if what the monks said was true, and that it belonged to a once-living abominable snowman specimen. He then brought the paper bag out from under the table and dumped its contents out. It was a human finger. Slick is said to have joked, "I take it that's not dessert." Byrne knew immediately what Osman meant for him to do. He was to take the human finger back to Nepal and convince the monks at Pangboche to let him exchange the human finger for one from the hand. To make it look genuine, the human finger also had to be treated with iodine. The match might not be perfect, but it would be close. Besides, he wasn't taking the whole hand, just a small bit of it. The good luck the hand had brought to the monastery could continue. Byrne told Slick and Hill about it. The Nepalese government were protective of the Yeti. There were laws against killing them, and it would surely extend to taking pieces of a dead one out of the country. He wouldn't be able to simply present the finger to customs and explain what it was, not without risking having it taken away. It would need to be smuggled out of Nepal. Slick told him not to worry. He'd take care of that, and he bid Byrne safe travels along with some money to coerce the monks to allow for the exchange. So, Byrne made the journey back to Nepal and again faced the treacherous hike to the monastery in the mountains. At first, the monks said no, but Byrne persisted. He offered them a donation. Would 10,000 rupees help? The monks talked it over and decided that yes, Byrne could have the finger provided he could make it look as if his finger, the human one, wasn't a forgery. So Byrne went to work. He cut off one of the fingers from the supposed Yeti hand and wired his iodine-treated finger in its place. It was sufficient and the monks were satisfied. Now the tricky part, how to get the finger back. Byrne left the monastery with his prize and contacted Slick. Had Slick figured out how to get the finger back to London? He had. There was a friend of his staying at the Grand Hotel in Calcutta who would be happy to help. All Byrne needed to do was to smuggle the finger into India and his friend would take it from there. The friend's name? Jimmy Stewart. Yes, that Jimmy Stewart. So Byrne did just that. He smuggled the finger into India and met up with Jimmy Stewart and his wife Gloria at the Grand Hotel in Calcutta. Byrne gave them the finger, and the Stewarts hid it in the one piece of luggage a custom officer was sure not to look: Mrs. Stewart's lingerie bag. Days later, after arriving in London, the Stewarts collected their bags. And guess which one was missing? Yep, the one containing the finger. Stung by their misfortune and having to tell his friend Tom Slick that the finger had been lost en route to London, the Stewarts checked into their hotel. And 3 days later, they received a call from the hotel's concierge. A British customs agent had found their bag and was delivering it to them personally. Fearing the finger had been discovered, the Stewarts asked if the bag had been opened, to which the agent said, of course not. They would never go through a lady's lingerie case. Crisis averted. The finger was delivered to Professor Hill to be examined, and this was years before DNA testing was a thing, so the professor compared it to human fingers. He told Slick that, in his estimation, the finger was not human. Slick was elated. It was not a definitive statement, but it was a start. If it wasn't human, then perhaps they had their proof. And then, life went on. Anticlimactic, I know. The finger remained in Hill's possession until his death in 1975, when his entire collection was handed over to the Royal College of Surgeons in London. From there, it was forgotten. The finger, which Peter Byrne had smuggled out of Nepal, remained sequestered away in an uncatalogued box for decades. A piece of the finger somehow ended up in the possession of anthropologist George Agogino. Agogino had also known Slick, and the piece was examined for an episode of the television show Unsolved Mysteries in 1991. The show echoed Hill's conclusion from years before that the finger wasn't quite human. The show's broadcast also brought exposure to the quiet Pangboche monastery, and the hand as well as the skull cap were stolen. It's more than likely that they presently reside in a private collection somewhere in the world, hopefully to be rediscovered and returned. And speaking of rediscovered, in the early 2000s, the original finger was found, still at the Royal College of Surgeons. Peter Byrne himself verified that it was indeed the finger that he'd handed over to Jimmy Stewart half a century before. A reporter, Matthew Hill, pushed for further tests to be performed on the finger. Science had progressed since the days when Professor Hill had compared it to human hands. DNA testing could provide the closure many needed. And it did, in 2011. The finger was human after all. But that's the finger. What about the missing skull cap? We may never know. What we do know is that the monks of Pangboche may have been right. Removing a piece of the hand may have brought them bad luck after all. It eventually led to the entire hand and skull fragment to be stolen. And since then, the monastery's income had dropped considerably. Hoping to curb the monastery's misfortune, Mike Alsop, an explorer and pilot, took it upon himself to help them out. Working with folks from the film industry, he had replicas made of the hand and skull cap, which he presented to the monastery. He's also set up a website called returnthehand.com, with the sole mission of locating the original artifacts and bringing them back to Pangboche. He has offered to fly anywhere in the world to retrieve them should they be found, with no questions asked. So, if you're listening, and you know of the missing hand and skull cap's whereabouts, let Mike Alsop know through his website. He'll come and get it, and you could help bring good luck back to Pangboche. Thank you for listening. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and leave a review. It really does help others find the show. And if you know someone who might enjoy the show, please tell them about it. You can find more information and references that went into this very episode by going to strangeencounters.org. I would really like to hear your suggestions for future episodes as well. And if you've had a strange encounter with something unusual or paranormal, I would love to hear it. Visit the contact page for information on submitting your story. And until next time, please take care of yourself. It's a strange world out there. Good night.
After making your city, so making sure I'm visualizing the